Good evening, my name is Barbara Kustra, and I'm the director of the Montana Museum of Art and Culture here at the University of Montana. It's my distinct pleasure to introduce our very special guest this evening, Winona LaDuke. She'll be speaking with us tonight as part of the ongoing President's Lecture Series, and special thanks goes to President Dennison for his support of her appearance, as well as the Office of Academic Affairs and Provost Royce Engstrom, the Department of Native American Studies, the Calvin B. Stott Visiting Scholars and Elders Fund, the Environmental Studies Program, and the Women's Studies Program. At the end of this evening's remarks, Ms. LaDuke will be available for some questions and answers, and then a book signing in the lobby. We ask that if you have a question, you use one of the microphones on either side of the auditorium, please. Introduce yourself and speak right into the mic. If you have a disability and want to ask a question, please let one of our roving mic people know, and we'll bring the mic to you. And also, please remember to turn off your cell phones right about now. Winona LaDuke is an Ojibwe enrolled member of the Mississippi Band. She's the executive director of Honor the Earth and founding director of the White Earth Land Recovery Project. Leading Honor the Earth, she provides vision and leadership for the organization's regranting program and its strategic initiatives. In addition, she has worked for 2 decades on the land issues of the White Earth Reservation. In 1988, she received the Reebok Human Rights Award, with which, in part, she began the White Earth Land Recovery Project. In '94, she was nominated by Time magazine as one of America's 50 most promising leaders under 40 years of age. She's also been awarded the Thomas Merton Award, the Anne Bancroft Award, the Ms. Woman of the Year Award, and the Global Green Award. She served as Ralph Nader's vice presidential running mate on the Green Party ticket in 1996 and in 2000. And in '07, she was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame. A graduate of Harvard and Antioch Universities, she's written extensively on Native American and environmental issues. Her books include Last Standing Woman, In the Sugar Bush, The Winona LaDuke Reader, All Our Relations, and Recovering the Sacred. And the last 2 books that I mentioned here are available for sale after tonight's presentation in the lobby. And she'll be signing them. A central reason we have the honor of Winona's presence in Missoula at this time is the exhibition Impacted Nations, on view in the Malloy and Paxson galleries here in the Partv Center. And everyone is welcome to visit the Malloy and Paxson after tonight's presentation, and tomorrow night, when we'll have the closing reception from 6 to 8, and Winona will present again at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Honor the Earth, for which I already mentioned Winona serves as director, organized this important contemporary Native American exhibit. It is, in the words of Honor the Earth, an artistic collaboration between Native peoples' cultural and spiritual relationship to the earth and the political and economic forces that undermine that relationship and our waves of life. It presents artists' interpretations of dams, of oil exploration, of coal mining, and nuclear power, pointing to the United States energy policy and offering alternative energy visions for the future. The artworks focus on lands that are sacred to Native peoples. And again, as Honor the Earth states, these sites are not only a part of our history, but they are also a part of our present lives and the lives of generations to come. Please help me warmly welcome Winona LaDuke.
Hello there. Can you hear me okay? Huh? What? Oh. First of all, I just want to let you all know that I'm not running for vice president. Just let you know. Just clarify that at the beginning so we don't get the question at the end. And in case you sit there the whole time and wonder, like, I wanted to ask that. Okay. Just get that over. Anyway. Ani nindoe maganatuk, nigagoy gitimagas. Bine Sikwa Idiko Makwa Indodeum. Gawa Babani Ka Gish Kaniganing and Dunjaba Migwich. Migwich Minabamanazi Minama. I'm greeting you in Ojibwe, which tonight I had the pleasure of having a dinner with someone who was an Ojibwe speaker from right here in Montana. So I know that there's a few Native people from Montana that are Ojibwe speakers, but I'm thanking you very much for the honor of being here tonight, and I'm telling you where I'm from, which is the White Earth Reservation, which is in northwestern Minnesota. I know you all know where Minnesota is that right? And I'm right in between Bemidji and Fargo. Just to give you a little bit of a sense, and this is very balmy weather for me. I was really like, whoa. But I'm thanking you for the honor of being here very much tonight. And Barbara did a lot of work on this, and I really appreciate that. All the work that was done and the awesome potential to show our opportunity to show our artwork here at your gallery. We need more space in the gallery, though. I'd like to mention that. So at some point, you guys should get a big gallery, so we can bring more artwork here. Just thought I'd mention that. So this is a moon here. We call this moon Anabanagizis. That's what we call this in our language. It is my personal favorite of the Ojibwe moons. It's I like it how it sounds. Anabanagizis, Anabanagizis. It means hard-crusted snow moon, which I think you understand, which is when it snows and then it thaws and then it snows again, or it's also known as the moon that you do not want to do a face plant in the snow. It's not good. But it's followed by our maple syruping moon, and then we have a Wabaganagizis, which is our flower moon, and then we are followed that by Odamanagizis, strawberry moon, Meangizis, our blueberry moon, Menominakagizis, our wild rice making moon, and then our leaf-changing color moon is after that, and then Gashkadnogizis, our freezing over moon, and then our little spirit moon, Gitchimanadu Gizis Soons, and Manadu Gizis Soons, and then our sucker moon, which is in the one we just got out of. But I think about that because I think about where we are, and I wanted to mention that to you because I don't know if any of you noticed that in the Ojibwe calendar there are no Roman emperors. It is possible to have a worldview without emperors. And then when reflecting on the issue of sustainability and where we need to go in this millennium, I think it is possible that we should think about having a world without so much empire. Because I do not think that empire is sustainable. I think that it may not be, the way to go. So I say that because I think that I'm going to ask you to try to think a little outside the box. And as we all get in our own boxes, we all do, and I'm fully aware of that. And it is really, as North Americans, we're so privileged in some ways, but we also are very challenged in our box. And in that we have a level of assumption and a level of presumption and a level of that this is the way it is and that this is the way it always is. And I think it is important to sometimes say I'm going to liberate myself from that way of thinking and think about what it is to be surviving here. Is it possible to make a society which is not based on conquest, but is instead based on survival in itself? And that is really the challenge I believe we face in this millennium. So as I reflect on that, I want to talk a little bit about Indigenous thinking about how one creates a sustainable society and the implications of that in the time of global climate change, peak oil, food security, these issues. Because I'm well aware that many people think of Indigenous thinking and even art, that is why we brought this art here too, and they put us in a box that is on a shelf over here. And they think about those things as folkloric, Indigenous thoughts or Indigenous thinking as something that, is something you read about and maybe was interesting or is something that is, is in the past. And it doesn't necessarily have implications for today. And I'm going to suggest that it is possible that Indigenous thinking has a great deal of implications in terms of its ability to teach us about sustainability. So having said that, I'm in this process of trying to work on this, and I have the privilege of working in my own community, which is the White Earth Reservation in northern Minnesota, and I also have the privilege of working nationally in Indian country around issues of sustainability and where we are going as Indigenous First Nations. And in that, I find that there are a lot of common themes, that we look at, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Indigenous thinking. But I have to issue a little disclaimer, because, quite often people say, they think that, I know most about my own Anishinaabe-Moan or my own Anishinaabe ways. I don't know about all other Indigenous people. Sometimes people say, well, what do the Indians think about this? I'm like, what are the white people thinking today? There's a lot of diversity of opinion. There are 500 federally recognized tribes. Indigenous people have different different thinking. But a lot of these tenets, I think, are still very similar, in a lot of our thinking. And so I'm going to talk about this as Indigenous thinking or land-based thinking, not just U.S. tribal people. Talking about this as land-based thinking. And we have these teachings. So in our Anishinaabe way, we have this teaching of Gichi Debwewin, or the Great Law, is what we would call it, the Great Law. We have a perception that the Creator's law is the highest law, higher than the laws made by nations, states, or municipalities, and one would do well to live in accordance with the Creator's law, to fashion one's society so one recognizes that how one lives in this generation will reflect on how those will live in the generations yet to come, to recognize a certain set of teachings. We call it Minopamataziwan in our language, Minopamataziwan, which is the good life. And it's a covenant we have as Anishinaabe people with the Creator. It's an agreement we have because we were the last ones to arrive here. All our other older brothers and relatives who might have wings or fins or paws preceded us. And we as the humans have a certain responsibility in this whole worldview, and that's this covenant we have. Because it's not a natural resource management. That's not what we're talking about. It is managing our own behavior as humans, because it is not the buffalo doesn't cause extinction of species over there in Yellowstone National Park or the wolves. It's us. We're the ones that cause the extinction of species and the destruction of ecosystems. So it's this Minopamataziwan is our way of taking care of these things, or of understanding and of behaving. So in this way of life, we understand a number of things. First, that we are related. Nindawe Maganaduk, that we are all related. And in our relatives, we do say that our relatives might have wings and they might have fins. And in this, we have teachings that talk about in our stories, our old stories, we were saved by those relatives. We have those teachings, and they weren't the charismatic megafauna that saved the Ojibwe. I said a long time ago, there's a great flood. And in that great flood that occurred with our people, our Mama King, our original woman, was there on the turtle's back. And that's why they call this Turtle Island. She was on the turtle's back, and there was a flood all around, and the animals were swimming there, and they had no place to go to. And so she asked the animals to help her. She asked first the otter. The otter was, a strong swimmer, to go down and get some earth from the bottom of the water and to bring it back up and put it on the turtle's back. But the otter could not do that, nor could the bear or the loon. It was the little guy, the muskrat, who went down and got the earth and brought it back, and then it was spread out to make this land here. Now, the reason I'm telling you that story is because I think that was an awesome story, but I also think it teaches us that something as like a muskrat, not real fancy, is the one who saved us. So what does that teach us? It teaches us not to underestimate our relatives, and teaches us this great gratitude for our ability to be here, which is based on these relatives who gave their lives, and who helped us out like that. So that's what we say, we are all related. Our songs, our Dodeum are related to this too. We have a teaching of cyclical thinking, which is to say that we as Anishinaabe people and other land-based peoples observe that all things which are cyclic, natural world is in cycles. The moons, the tides, the seasons, they are all cyclical. Our bodies, and time itself in many worldviews is cyclical as well. So we understand that, and we understand that one should try to keep that in how one forms one's economy, and how one forms one's way of life, to reaffirm on an annual basis or on a monthly basis that relationship to that creation that is there. And we have this teaching that is called reciprocity. That's what anthropologists call it. I don't really know how you call it in Ojibwe. That is to say that when we go out and harvest our wild rice, I harvest rice on my reservation, and And a lot of there's some young women here and some young women over here that know my kids ever since they were bitty. But my son now, he's 17 years old. And my oldest son, I rice with him. And I used to pull him around the rice beds because I was afraid he'd tip over the canoe. And now he is too big. I make him pull me around because he's, that's a lot of work, pulling a 180, 200-pound man around, I'm buff, but that's tough, So he pulls me around. But when we go out, we always pray and give thanks to the Creator for giving us that rice and thank that rice, for giving itself to us. And then we have a big feast. We have that Thanksgiving feast all the time because we acknowledge that which was given to us. And our deal is we take care of the lakes. That's how we keep our part of the agreement, is we take care of the lakes so that they're always able to feed us, And anthropologists call this reciprocity, where you take only what you need and you leave the rest, and you are thankful for that which you take. You're thankful for that. And I say that because all of these, I believe, are elements of sustainability. I think that these are tenets of sustainability, this recognition of us as humans, as being in this larger reality of this world and these relations that exist that are intergenerational. And I want to say this to you because a lot of you are very highly evolved. After all, you live in Missoula. So I know I was in Sundance, Wyoming a couple of days ago, which is not a particularly evolved town, I noticed. And I got my speeding ticket with Aurora. Aurora, give your wave. This is Aurora, my colleague and assistant, came with me from the Bad River Reservation. We did not talk back to the police officer in Sundance. We could still be there, it looked like. Anyway, in Missoula, they would have been nicer, but anyway. So I say this because I just have to say that industrial society doesn't think this way of sustainability. And this is not a news flash to most of you, but I was asked to talk a little bit about this. So instead of believing, for instance, that the Creator's law is the highest law, we have a perception that man's laws are higher than the Creator's law. So we do things like allocate water rights until there's no water left in the river. That's what we do. And we change allowable levels of pollutants and change the designations. Of them, I mean, I'm pretty smart, but you start reading those things and they have changed the levels, And it is quite often, it seems, changed according to who is in office or how much money they gave you, And then we trade pollution credits. This is a new one. I'm not sure how much, we can move that carbon around, But that is what we're doing, because we somehow believe that we are so much smarter, that we are able to outsmart the oceans and the wind, and I think that is a little bit foolish. I think that perception might be a bit foolish. Instead of understanding that we are all related, we are very anthropocentric. In our worldview, everything is in terms of its utilitarian benefit to humans. We call everything. We call things natural resources, agricultural resources. We talk about land use planning. Everything is in relationship to what it does for us, as humans. And we've done pretty good. Over this time, we've managed to, we see the destruction of more species in the past 150 years than since the Ice Age with this kind of management practices. We see the extinction of one species after the other, and we create paupers out of our relatives. The best example, a close example is try to be a salmon in the Columbia River system. You are poor. You are poor in your own territory. And that is what this is. That is this creating of, we do not think of our relatives. And we think that somehow, in our relatives, we think that we don't pay attention. So, we have this problem now where we didn't pay attention to the bees because they were not so important. So what about the $19 billion in U.S. agriculture that is dependent on pollination by bees, that we are pretty much in trouble if we don't think a little bit more about not what bees can do for us, but how those bees are going to make it, and what we've done. I mean, it is sobering. The past couple of years, the discussion on pollinators, it's sobering. And they are not kidding, you know? And this is a serious issue. Instead of thinking cyclically, we are into linear thinking. That is America. You know, that is the idea of the frontier, the West. The idea that there will be greener pastures further on and we can keep going. You know, and that somehow in that, you know, we don't need to look back and we don't need to ensure that it is good where we just were. You know, there's this perception that somehow we can go find someplace else that is better. And I know a lot of people come to Montana for that reason. You know, I'm onto that. And I go these places, you know, I have the privilege of traveling, and I was in Hawaii with my son. He's giving the wave. He'd give the wave over there. This is my son, Gwaikanamid Gasco. He is wearing the Don't Genetically Engineer Tarot t-shirt. We're a family that was raised to protest. But we're over there, and there's people that move from here to there. And I was like, why are you here? You know, what are you doing here? Oh, we didn't like it, got messed up over there, so we came here. I was like, what? So you could put up your private property sign, you know, demarcate it and just add a little more impact to an island that doesn't need any more people, you know? I mean, I'm just saying, like, what is that? That perception, you know? And so we create a society that has a philosophy that we can keep moving in this linear way, and we do not take responsibility. And then we create the economics of that, you know? And all I just want to say is, like, what are two of the biggest growth industries in America that reflect this linear thinking? One of them is waste management, you know, which is, you know, what do we go, 50 trillion pounds of waste a year? Totally linear thinking. They're saying that, like, what do they say? Every year we dig up 500 billion tons of raw materials, and 6 months later, 99% of it is waste. There you go. That is not any reflection at all on a hydrological cycle or on a way that you put back into Earth. It is instead a perception that you can keep going and that someone will deal with your waste, you know, which is what we've done. And so the big businesses, you know, waste management. I went up to receive that National Women's Hall of Fame induction. You know who underwrites it? Waste management companies. It was unbelievable. Seneca Falls. You know, I thought that they call it landfills. They are not landfills. They're mountains, you know, up there in these areas. It's very tragic, you know, how the significance of waste management as a growth business, you know, is in this country. And what is one of the other major growth businesses in this country, which indicates it's the social element of linear thinking. Social element of linear thinking would be prisons, the creating of waste populations, and we have done an amazing job at that. Of the 9 million prisoners in the world, 2.1 million are American. 9 million prisoners in the world and 2.1 million are American. Highest prison population in the world would be here, you know? 1 out of 140 Americans is in prison. And if you are a rural area, vie for a prison. Go compete with another rural area to get a prison, maybe a super prison. You've got long-term employment potential for this, you know? And that's what I'm saying is, it's like, what a tragedy that we've created a society in which 2 of the largest sources of wealth are basically based on either human misery or just, you know, poison. That's not a long-term plan for sustainability. That's not the health of a society, you know, in that. And reciprocity, we do not have that. We do not have the take only what you need and leave the rest at all. We have pretty much the clear cutting. We have pretty much, I did on my tour across Montana have to stop in Butte. I wanted to see the biggest hole in the world. It was really funny. We show up, it was about 11 o'clock at night. And I was like, Aurora, we've got to go see the biggest hole in the world. You guys don't need a lecture on it, but you know. You know, basically what I'm saying is, it's like, take only what you need and leave the rest, huh? I'm not thinking that as a natural resource policy in Montana generally. You know, I'm not thinking of that as one, you know? And so we are now, you know, in the place we're at. With all those smarts, you know, I don't know what that plan would be Turns out they aren't making any new water. You know, what we got is what the dinosaurs had. So I don't think it's a really good idea to, you know, turn the rest of the aquifers into, you know, whether it's some kind of mining waste repository or what, you know. 1.7 billion people in the world are water challenged, about to go to 2.5 billion. And we're sitting here basically watching them put, you know, more poison in our water. The mining industries up here. That's what I think, you know. So we have built a society which is not based on any element of sustainability. It is said in our community, we had a teaching a long time ago. And it said that these prophets came to our people and they said, you Anishinaabe people, they gave us a lot of instructions. And we lived at that time on the eastern seaboard. And we were instructed that if we did not move from the eastern seaboard, we would perish. And so our people were instructed to follow a shell which appeared in the sky to the place where the food grows upon the water. And that was wild rice. That's how we ended up where we were. And those prophets talked about the time that would be ahead, and they talked about that we'd have some hard times, that we would botch some things up. We did that. Every society botches things up. And that's really important to remember. It's a question of if you can get yourself out of it, if you got the humility, you know. They talked about how some people who come and some would have good hearts and some would have bad hearts. And that's true. It's really, really important not to be historical revisionists and pretend that all the founding fathers were great guys, because they weren't, you know. More than slave owners, more than that, you know. I think about it a lot because I come out here in places and they got places like Harney Peak, you know, named after guys who killed a lot of Lakota people, you know. Or you got Amherst, you know, founding father in New England. I went to school in Boston. Amherst, you got an Amherst, Colorado, or you got an Amherst, Montana? Any of these states out here? You missed that guy. They name all these towns after these guys. That guy was one of the initial purveyors of smallpox-ridden blankets. You know? Why do you name towns after these people? Why do you name peaks after these guys, right? Chivington, you know, all of them. But it's important not to be historical revisionists. And then they talked about how a lot of our people would disappear. We didn't have a word for smallpox in our language, but that's what they were talking about. A lot of our people, I say 90%, 95% of our people died from those diseases. And then they talked about how a lot of our things would disappear, and we didn't have a word for anthropologist either. But that's what they were talking about. When your whole village would get hauled off, or your people or your things would get hauled off to these museums, you know. A lot of items, we're just getting them back, you know. And then they talked about how our people would have a really hard time and kind of be in this hard period. And then they talked about these new people that would arrive, and they said those people would go and begin to get back our things. They go and begin to get back our drums and our language. They would remember our language, they would remember our songs, they would remember who they were. And they would go and begin to recover those things. That's what those prophets said like 1,000 years ago. And I guess they were talking about NAGPRA, you know? These laws where we can actually recover our people, our bodies, and our items from these museums. And who would know that they would think about that, you know? So they call those people, they say these people are called the Ashki Anishinaabe, which means the new people. And they said that the Ashki Anishinaabe, that those people would remember who they were, and then those people would be, they call that the seventh generation, and they say that seventh generation, our Anishinaabe people would have two choices. And one choice, they said, is well-worn, but it is scorched. And they said the second choice is not well-worn and it is green. And it would be our choice upon which path to embark. That's what they said. That was like 1,000 years ago, right? And that's where we are as Anishinaabe people, but I actually think that's where we are as America. Got a question, you know, which path upon which are we going to embark? Which one? Because we are the richest and most powerful country in the world. No absence of the wealth or the technology to do the right thing could absolutely, you know, create the next economy, which is based on local food. You know, local energy that does not mine everything and does not pretend that there is anything like clean coal. You know, that is based on a just set of relations, we could do that. So that's what I think. But I tell you that because those teachings, are held very dear in our community, and I think that they have some relevance today. So let me talk briefly about what I think that those choices mean in the broad, and talk about our own work. So having said that, the issues that we are dealing with in my own community are these issues that are societal issues, and they're national, international. There are 3 issues I'm just going to briefly talk about that are issues of this millennium I see. There are a lot of issues, but I'm working on the issues of climate change, peak oil, and food security. Because I think that those are defining issues in the next 10 years, and we better get a plan on them. That's what I think, So let me just talk a little bit about this. I'm not going to give you a lecture on climate change. I'm going to assume a little bit here. We're going to assume that you guys do not have your heads in the sand, and that you know that we are looking at, in North Dakota, I think it's a 4-degree temperature rate, increase. I don't know what it is out here. Between the cataclysmic storms, the loss of snowfall, or, pretty much no idea. All I know is that we are in some trouble. I got that down, and I don't know how many more models I need to look at. I don't really think I need to look at any. I think I'm good on that idea. You basically got 3 choices. One is you got to cut the carbon. Oh, that'd be the main one. Then you got to figure out what kind of mitigation you're going to do, and then you got to figure out how you're going to survive. What's your plan? In that. Because this reality we are in today is not the reality that my son and my grandson are going to be living in. We are in the final era of, whatever this is, of an over-consuming petroleum high world, from what I can see. And it's not going to look like this. So we, between the cooling centers and the others. So the present approaches to that out of Washington are pretty much dead wrong, from what I can ascertain. The 2 answers, clean coal, we already discussed this. I'm not going to go too far to it, but it turns out that there's no such thing as clean coal. I spent the night in coal strip just for the hell of it, just to make sure I was not incorrect in my assessment. Gonna mine it, gonna have some problems. Could have the most energy efficient coal plant. I'm fully aware that, there's likelihood the coal's gonna be around for a while, but give me a break. Do not try to pretend that you're gonna come up with some fantasy to sequester the carbon of the United States. Offshore? In some aquifer with no real plan. So you're gonna spend trillions of dollars with that one, or what? Just so we can keep being addicted? That's it, And then what is the Bush administration plan? Plan B, or plan whatever they want to call it, is nuclear energy. I spent a good portion of my younger years with, the age of a lot of you. I started doing political work when I was 18, 17 years old. And you know what I did? I fought nuclear power plants. And I fought them because the uranium was coming from Indian communities, and we were dying in the mines. Because you can't safely mine uranium. The best thing to do with uranium is leave it in the ground. And the nuclear industry was saying it was clean and cheap, and it was the answer. And we knew that wasn't true down at the Navajo reservation. We knew that wasn't true, and we fought those uranium mines. 44 uranium mines, 10 uranium mills when I went down there to work in 1978. We worked to close them down. But the way we did that is that we worked with a lot of your parents, to close down the nuclear industry. They didn't build any new nuclear power plants in this country for 30 years. No new nukes. And that's because they were a bad idea. It's a hell of a way to boil water. It's like using butter for a chainsaw. A chainsaw for butter. It's like, don't do it. You don't need a nuclear reactor. But that's what they just did. Was it $25 billion that they just allocated? Because none of those guys, Citibank, Credit Suisse, Lehman Brothers, none of those guys would finance the nuclear power plants in this country, and they just appropriated $25 billion to begin rebooting the nuclear industry. They got 12 reactors in the hopper and 15 more coming down. You know, if that is the answer, what the heck was the question? You know? So, you know, that was a bad response. The second problem we face is this problem of peak oil. I had to break it to my 17-year-old son that before he could even legally drive, I consumed half the world's known oil resources. He's still mad at me. You know, I was like, sorry, buddy, that idea of driving around in your car and hanging out with girls, that's not going to work. Get a bicycle for 2 or something, I don't know. Grab the horse, go to town. Fortunately, he has a very resourceful mother, and about last year, 2 years ago, I purchased a souped-up biodiesel that runs on grease. And it's a Mercedes, 1983 Mercedes, and it runs on grease. So for his drivers, the celebration of his driving, he is going to get a 1983 Mercedes that is fixed up by some hippies in Berkeley. Thank you. And so he can go and get some grease and go on a date. I mean, that's what resourceful mothers do to help their sons, right? Like, go get some grease, honey. You can go out. Oh, poor guy. Anyway, so what I'm telling you is that what you know, which is we consumed. Congratulations to all of us. Let's pat ourselves on the back. Good level of consumption that was, huh? Have fun? Riding around? Consuming half the world's, you know, so everything that's left is like the bottom of the sea in China and some crack down there. They're going to go like 20,000 feet down to get. They're all proud at British Petroleum and Shell Oil of how deep they can go now. Great. You know, you got the tar sands up in Alberta. Let's just squeeze some sand into oil and bring that all down. I mean, you know, we're you know, you got a petroleum economy and you don't got any petroleum left, you know? And so we are going to extraordinary measures to try to feed that addiction, you know? And then that is topped on the fact that we now have a food system that's entirely addicted to petroleum. That was brilliant. So the meal, you know, the average meal they're saying travels 1,546 miles from farmer to table. That's a hell of a long way. That's a hell of a long way when you're running out of oil, isn't it? I don't know. You know, 1,546 miles, we did all this great green revolution, bad plan to till the whole plains, bring it under irrigation, bring all those fossil fuels, all those fertilizers, and they're saying now at least 10, maybe 10 calories of fossil fuels to create 1 calorie of food. That is a really, really scary proposition. And I don't know how many of you grow your own food or farm or, you know, this is Missoula, come on, give me a break. Some of you guys are growing, right? Come on, let me see. That's very good. How many of you go to like farmers markets here? No, okay, this is better, see? Missoula gives me hope. I mean, you know, but that's what we're talking about, you know? I mean, vast majority of America is just going and buying food. And I just saw, what did they quarantine, 143 million pounds of meat for the school lunch program? Oh, that was really reassuring, wasn't it? I was like, wow, I'm really glad. I'm really feeling secure about that food. You know, so between the fact that our food security is related to our petroleum consumption, right? That is quandary number 1 in terms of food security. Then there is the fact that we pretty much have an industrial food system that has gone entirely awry. Or I don't know if it's gone awry, because I think that it would be a natural progression on some level, you know? And so, and then, you know, we have no idea. And then you have the problem of, you know, that we are fighting in Minnesota, which is, I don't know, a lot of places are fighting at the fact that the 2 largest, the vast majority of the world's commercial seeds are controlled by Monsanto and DuPont. And that adds to your food insecurity. You know, to have a couple of corporations control the seeds of the world. So, what are we doing? I always have to tell our story on the White Earth Reservation. Briefly, I did mention I was from between Bemidji and Fargo. My reservation, I don't know what it is equivalent to a Montana Indian reservation, probably a little smaller than most of them out here, but It's 36 miles by 36 miles, but we are technically considered the poorest people in the state of Minnesota. Our reservation's not good in terms of its demographics, but we are some tough people up there. And we got tired of waiting for people to fix things for us because we realized it was not going to happen. No one was going to come save us. There's no ferry. There was nobody going to fix it. So we look around and we said, well, we're not the smartest, we're not the best looking, we're not the richest, but we're the people who live here. And so we could sit around and complain or, kvetch, one of my favorite Yiddish words, kvetch, for the next, 40 years and get an ulcer, we could do something. So we work, I have the privilege of directing an organization called the White Earth Land Recovery Project on my own reservation, and then I work for the Honor the Earth Foundation nationally. We work on the issues of land, culture, and environment. But we decided to, work on recovering all of that. And I'm not going to talk about all elements of that, but what I will talk about in terms of food security and peak oil and climate change is that we decide to work on the issues of food and energy in our community and just say, look, we're not going to be victims. And so in terms of energy, we started with that. A couple years ago, we did the energy plan for our tribal government. I pulled out all my nerdy skills from college. We blew through 5 consultants. I'm not BSing you. I don't know if any other people work for Indian tribes and see how many of those consultants come in. And they're like, you walk out and you're like, that's not what I asked you to do. And you just get something like some agenda they had. I'm going to say it like that, but that's what it's like. So in the end, my one sister, she says, I have the, what's it called? That syndrome. I was like, okay, I'll just do it myself. And that's what we did. We pulled together all our brain cells and we figured out, we used a lot of stuff for those consultants, but we figured out where our energy came from for our community. And we said, well, it turns out, it comes from coal and nuclear power, and this is how much we use, 8 megawatts of power for our tribe, and turns out, it's got some bad sources, and it turns out we don't have any dinosaurs. And it turns out we got a 60% unemployment rate on our reservation, and we're importing everything. And it turns out we spend about 1/4 of our money on energy. The United States spends about 1/5. That's an industrial economy. A highly addicted U.S. industrial economy spends about 1/5 of our income on energy. Right? Our reservation, because we are cold, remote, 1/4. Nobody owns a Prius on my whole reservation. I do have that grease mobile. But, so we did this, and I present this to my tribe, an energy plan, and working with the tribal government's a lot like working with the state government sometimes, and, they are listening to me, and, you can imagine about half the time they think I'm the banshee from outer space. It just goes with the territory, you just get used to it, It's like, yep, that's what I said, And I'm just telling you because a lot of you are young people, and, maybe you like to be liked. Get over it. It's like, can't win a popularity contest every day. So I go in there, we go explain it to our tribe. And what they finally understood was that we spent all that money. It wasn't climate change that scared them so much. And I have to say a lot of politicians, their assessment is, oh, that's not going to happen while I'm in office, is it? Which is tragic. But that is how they're thinking. I'm just going to, keep it up because now while I'm in office, I won't have to deal with that mess, So anyway, we decide to, work on that, and we wrote an energy plan for our tribe, and we start with conservation, and you all know, you're hip on all this stuff, so we turn out, we work on that, we put this, I just was out at Northern Cheyenne trying to get a solar heating panel installed at Northern Cheyenne. And all these tribes here, you should look at this thing, because they're saving 25% on their heating bills out on Rosebud Reservation and Pine Ridge Reservation by putting a south-facing solar heating panel. It's kind of very low tech on the south-facing wall, because you get a lot of sun, but it's cold as heck, right? And then it heats up and it blows hot air in your house. So first you do your efficiency, and then you put these solar heating panels and you reduce your heating bill, 20% maybe, And then I talked to my tribe, I said, wood is a 4-letter word, I know that. We spent the last 10 years trying to get all sophisticated and go to propane, and that wasn't the smartest plan, it turns out, because we don't have any dinosaurs. But we have a lot of wood on our reservation. And you could have a local wood economy and, And you can, support your community like that. A lot of people can work in that, and provide wood. And I don't know about you all, but I realize that I don't have to go to a shrink because I have a wood pile. It's very good, I know you guys can all go to shrink all you want, but I'm going to the wood pile. I get more done, It doesn't cost me, it saves me money. Anyway, so that's what we're trying to do, is to get this local economy, and then, looking at all the efficiency and biofuels, those things. And then we're looking at the transportation economy, and my tribe, we got some local buses we're trying to run on biodiesel, looking at that. But then, our school buses are looking at biodiesel and grease for those. We're looking at that. And then we put up some wind turbines. We put up a small one in 2003. And my theory on this, and you guys are more advanced on this than we are, but a lot of Indian communities are just like other rural communities. They're very conservative. And the reality is that change is going to happen. It's just a question of who controls the change. But we are, everybody's like stuck, and they're like, I don't want to go for that renewable energy because it's different. That's like this little mindset, which is based on the fear of change, or I don't know, it's like this set of things, and plus we all got so useless that we don't do anything like produce energy anymore. So we're there, and we put one up, and then I just saw this and they all thought we were insane. And it took very short time before one kind of redneck farmer come and asked us to help him put one up. And then now my tribe is putting up a 750 kilowatt wind turbine. And we're putting up another 250 in this tribe down one reservation over. That's how we call it, one reservation over. Those guys are putting up, they ask us, they don't have windy land. They said, Winona, can you help us site a 2 megawatt up there? So what I'm trying to say is this, somehow you gotta liberate yourself. And get out of the box and say, oh, it's possible, and this way we're not victims because we're generating our own power, But I see this happen, but you got to build the intellectual capacity, technical capacity. I went to my first community wind conference a couple years ago in Iowa. Went to the community wind conference, and it turns out that Indian tribes, Montana is the best example. Indian tribes, go figure how this happened. Indian tribes are the windiest place in the country. I don't know how that worked out, but I don't know how they stand up there at Blackfeet. It's very windy, Oh my God, And Indian reservations are the windiest place in the country, And so I'm thinking, like, in the next energy economy, we should be in there. This ought to be worth something, And so, but I go to this conference, and I'm thinking, okay, the Indian people are going to be here, and there's 2 Indians there, me and Pat Spears from Brule, Lower Brule. And I look around this conference, it was the most gender and racially stratified conference I was ever at my whole life. And I've been around. There was like 2 Native people, me and Pat Spears, and 5 women. And everybody else was named like Lars and Lenz, and Leaf and Olaf or whatever. I was like, welcome to the next energy economy. But, hats off to those guys, the Danes and the Norwegians that are in the wind energy economy. But it is incredibly shameful to be such an addicted country. And, the guys who know about wind energy are 50-year-old guys from Denmark. Those guys are totally on it. But a lot of young people in this room, I am not kidding. You're talking about an addictive economy, for crying out loud. You want a job security? Work in the energy industry. Someone has to, you need a few more women, a few more people of color, a few guys named like Jason, or I don't know, something. Anyway, so I went to that conference, but it was sobering. It was sobering. But it illustrated to me, so I was like, we have to get the technical and intellectual capacity to run these turbines. Because this is what our communities need to do. Is get up there and be at the leadership of this, or else we're going to be outsourced, And I have to say that, I don't know where Montana is at in this. And I heard that Blackfeet, I'd like someone to tell me about that maybe at the end in the questions, but Blackfeet was looking at that. But it is shameful, these states. Montana and North Dakota, they are shameful. I mean, I'm sorry to hurt your feelings, but I was sitting there on a northern Minnesota road, and I watched this. They would block off the whole road to send the turbine by. And I was like, I get this feeling you fight on these issues for your whole life, and you're like, oh, we're winning. I see a turbine going by, and it was going west, and I stopped. I have to stop because there's a 2-lane road, and it's all blocked off. And I said, where's it going? And they said, it's going to North Dakota. It was called Tatanka. I was like, oh, good, it must be going to Lakota territory called Tatanka. And I said, so where's it from? And they said, it's from Spain. I was like, so let me get this right. They put it on a barge in Spain. They sent it across the Atlantic Ocean, down the St. Lawrence Seaway, through the Great Lakes, to the port of Duluth, to put it on a truck to send it to North Dakota. Talk about, where is North Dakota and Montana in this, These darn windy states, and we're importing, that whole economy from those, that's insane. So we're going to build it whiter. That's what I'm saying. If we can get it together, you guys can get it together. We're working on food security and climate change. We want to fight this climate change issue. I'm really hoping you don't put in too much more coal out here. And I'm working on trying to oppose that in North Dakota because I'm just downwind, but it's not right to add any more carbon. It's just not right. But for us, we're looking at how we create food security based on this peak oil and climate challenge. And so in terms of that, what we figured out on our reservation, and it turns out that Indian country and these old foods are much higher in nutritional value than most of the hybrids that you can get at the store. So for instance, like our Potawatomi lima beans that are grown near us, they have like 23 times the antioxidants of the equivalent you get at the store. They're much higher in amino acids. Much higher in fiber, iron, those heritage varieties. Now, I don't know how this happened, but in the process of creating industrialized agriculture, they bred for standability, uniformity, maybe flavor, how it appeared, how long it would last, how it would can. I'm not sure, that's what they did. They spent a lot of time breeding them like that, and it turns out they bred out a good portion of the nutritional value. The value is in those older seeds. And those older seeds are not all owned by Monsanto and DuPont yet, And so we've been around this process of trying to restore and strengthen our seeds and keep our food economy. Our battle's in 2 areas. Our first is in our wild rice. I'm in this 7-year battle now with the University of Minnesota to keep them from genetically engineering wild rice. We feel like wild should mean something. Genetically engineered wild rice, those phrases should not appear together. It grows on lakes and rivers. That's how you harvest it. And if you grow a test plot in northern Minnesota of a genetically engineered grass seed, which is wild rice, you will contaminate those lakes. There's no containing of genetically engineered, and in fact, the reality is that a lot of those seeds and a lot of the pollen, a lot of those plants, they're sexual predators. A lot of people don't notice that, and a lot of people don't even know anything about genetic engineering, and they're at their state legislatures. I was out there talking to them, and they actually thought those plants were sterile. I said, they are not sterile. They are aggressive, and they will mix with your varieties, And so we are battling them, and they have not yet genetically engineered wild rice in the state of Minnesota, but we are still battling them. We got a piece of legislation passed, but it is not strong enough to protect it. And it is a very tough battle. But that battle is worldwide. We went to Hawaii in the winter, which, because the University of Hawaii has genetically engineered taro, which is most sacred food for the native Hawaiians. It is their elder brother in their cosmogenealogy. That's what they call it, cosmogenealogy, how they descended from the sun and the earth. The older brother in their genealogy is kalo or taro, and then the Hawaiian, it's the younger sibling. An awesome story. So their position is that you cannot genetically engineer our relative. It's baffling to Indigenous people how someone who thinks that they are God. It's a question, huge ethical question. Well, those genetically engineered plants are not the kinds you want for climate change. Anything the Irish potato famine should have taught us, it is that diversity is what you need, not a monocrop. you know? And no matter what they say, the more industrialized and the more monocrop you get, the more dangerous it is, whether it is a social monocrop or whether it is a biological monocrop. That's the danger, you know? And so we are fighting to keep our plants from getting genetically engineered, our relatives, our most sacred food, wild rice, but we are fighting to bring back all our varieties. And so we plow 170 gardens on our reservation. And we're growing out these really old varieties of corn. I got a handful from a seed breeder a few years ago. And then this year I went on a mission to get more of these different corn seeds. So I went and I visit them. I'm getting some Arikara. No, it's a Hidatsa and Mandan white flour corn. And then 3 days ago, I went and saw one of my personal heroes, if you ever get a chance to meet him. He's like a rock star in Indian country. His name is Gerard Baker. A lot of these young Native people know who he is. He's the superintendent of Mount Rushmore. Right? You guys got that right? There's a great big 6'5" Hidatsa man with a Smokey the Bear hat, who's the head of Mount Rushmore National Monument. I understand some of the fine citizens of Rapid City have been a little uncomfortable. But they need to get over it. You know, Native people need to run these national wildlife refuges, and these national parks. We're just fine. You know? But I went to see him. I was trying to get a meeting. He's just busy, you know, and he didn't get the message. I don't know. But anyway, one of my women friends was going to see him for a meeting. I said, I'm going to crash your meeting. I totally crashed. I went in and I was like smitten. He's just like a rock star to me. Like, you know, isn't that cool? Highest Indian, you know, great big guy, but you know, the highest Indian and National Park Service, I think that guy is. That's pretty cool, huh? But anyway, turns out he is an avid seed breeder. He's giving me some Arikara white flint corn. He was so happy that someone wanted to grow the corn. He was so happy. So I tell you that because that's what we're doing. Because those guys, those tough guys, are not addicted to petroleum. And they are not addicted to irrigation. And they are frost resistant and they are drought resistant. So that's what we're growing. And I'm telling you that because, you know, you got to figure out how to eat. So we're growing it and we're eating it. You guys have a good farm to school program here. I understand. I want to applaud you for that. That's very good. We started up my school lunch program where my 8-year-old goes to school. I got a school lunch program and we're taking it over because I realized that the level of corn syrup was kind of high. And you could either medicate all those kids with Ritalin or you could maybe check on what they're eating. So that's what we're doing. So I don't have a solution for all, but in closing, what I would say is that I was reading Lester Brown's work, this Plan 2B. How many of you have seen Lester Brown's? You should, okay, I get to assign one thing, this Plan 2B. That's one smart guy. Lester Brown. But anyway, he's talking about this. And Lester Brown figures that for $104 billion a year, you could do a massive program on ecological restoration. That's just thinking. You know, I don't know how much that biggest hole in the world is going to be to clean up, but you know, you could start with your coral reefs, some reforestation, mitigation for, you know, desertification, you know, prairie restoration, cut your carbon, 104 million a year. No, wait, no, he's saying 98 million a year, excuse me, that was his price tag, 98 million a year. And people are like, well, how's that gonna pan out? Well, like, what you gotta remember is that we're spending 98 billion a year, excuse me, 98 billion a year, and what you have to remember is that what you know, which is that we're spending 104 billion a year right now on a war. You know, it's a choice. You want the green path or you want the scorched. You know, we spend money poorly, we make bad decisions, and we make a bigger mess. So, you know, that's what he says, and, you know, in our view, you know, you do this restoration effort, you move to your efficiencies, you move towards the next energy economy, which the reality is that the green energy economy or the green economy would bring most Americans out of poverty. You know, that's what they're saying. The Rust Belt, these inner cities. And then you create this path which is, more in keeping with the natural world. And in the end, we might all be different a little bit, but in the end, I think that you and I would agree that we all got to drink the water and we all have to breathe the air. And so, you could be smartest guy or smartest lady in the world, but in the end, you still got to do that. So the question that I always ask, I have the privilege of coming here and I'm thankful for this opportunity, but I look out there and there are a lot of really smart young people. And I can't tell you what to do. I can say, consider that. And I always, I reflect on it and I look out there and I say, well, do something of consequence with yourselves. That's what I would say. That's the most important thing. Do something of consequence. Don't be mediocre. Don't let it happen to you. Because all that change is not going to be made by someone else. It's going to be made by us. Change is made by individuals. That's how we make history. Miigwech, well, thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer a few questions as you like. Miigwech. So where are those mics? Are they, if you have some. I think my son wants to give you the wave too. Do you want to give the wave? Stand up and show your tarot shirt. I have to say, we went with the Native Hawaiians to the legislature in Hawaii to protest. They're trying to just get a hearing on their tarot bill. They can't even get a hearing. There was 1,000 Hawaiians that marched to the state legislature in Hawaii. That was pretty powerful to me, and they were all chanting in Hawaiian. They gave me the notes, and I was like, yeah, I'll get through the first line when you guys be on the fourth one. That was pretty awesome. You had a question? Yeah.
Winona, I was wondering if you were at all optimistic that there might soon be a reconciliation and a distribution of the Native American Trust Fund, and more importantly, how would a disbursement impact a tribe like yours?
Oh, that's a good question. I like to be optimistic that, we've been at it for a long time. Eloise has been at it for quite a while. And I'm someone that believes that that there will be justice. And I think it's really important because a lot of, I'm sure you're pretty astute here in Missoula, but a lot of people think that, Native people are in this tough situation. Well, the reality is that, someone has all our assets. Federal government mismanaged them, and, we're talking about huge amounts of money, for these communities who have had their assets mismanaged by the federal government. And so it's not charity, it's justice. That's what it is. It's the return of, that so that our communities can recapitalize themselves. Our tribe's lands are largely allotted and to individual landholders. A good chunk of them are alienated on our reservation. So privately held non-Indian landholders. We do have some that are publicly held lands, and there's a large amount of timber revenues, of trees that were taken and not accounted for well. And so that would return some revenues to our tribe. And I actually am one of these IIM people, in our list. I get this note from the BIA about every couple of years that says, "Where are you?" And I'm right here, because they're still trying to identify all the Indian heirs, and the landowners. I said, "No, I'm right here." And I guess my cousin said I was still on the list of to be found Indians. So if you see some from the Bureau, you can mention that you did see me. They could find me if they really want to. But, a lot of tribes are, this would be a big ability to recapitalize tribal economies. And hopefully to, restore or, buy back land and create the kind of economies that we are self-determining. And I have no idea on the timetable. I'm thinking probably next administration. But that may be coming pretty soon, so, Thank you for your question. Is there one over here?
First of all, I'd like to thank you for the encouragement and the guidance that you've shown as a Native American person to our people. In our language, Cree language, we always say akamemo, means to keep trying, keep going in the way that you're doing. But tonight my question is, what I'd like to hear your opinion on is our traditional Native American medicines that a lot of companies are trying to appropriate and gain wealth basically from them, whereas our people get no money in return or no payment for the things that they've shown.
Thank you. That's a really good question. I mean, in a lot of our teachings, we have a real hard time selling our medicines, and that's the thing about our teaching. There's a reciprocity, it's a gift, but we have a pretty big trade economy. I don't know how your community is, but we have a big trade economy, and when someone is sick, we trade back and forth, for those medicines like that, but there's not a lot of cash. There's not cash. It's not accepted, really, in that way. And I think that it's really important to recognize that, because I think that the paradigm largely in this society is much more towards a cash economy. And, it has caused a lot of havoc with the harvesting of medicines and the over-harvesting in some of these communities, from what I understand. And so I think that, communities have to discourage that, that whole practice. I think that, that's the central piece, because it misses that reciprocity where you take care of the medicines, and the over-harvesting is not a taking care of the medicines, I see, I do see, I have some good friends that, like down in Flagstaff, one has a store, and she has a lot of those traditional medicines in them, and they have, but the communities down there, they work with her and they get their medicines, and then, the relationship is kind of, has to be crafted carefully. So I guess I just want to say that I'm not a hard line, because I think that there are ways to craft those relationships, and Phyllis Hogan has really good ethnobotanical society, protects a lot of those medicines down there. But I just want to say, as a last thing, a lot of people, the intellectual and cultural property rights of Indigenous peoples are not valued, in this society. And our knowledge systems are viewed as of less significance. Even I go testify at a hearing, and Indigenous knowledge is not viewed as on par with scientific knowledge. But yet the knowledge of those medicines over all those years is a knowledge that is very significant, but it's more than the chemical makeup of the medicine. You can't quantify it. Not everything is quantifiable. And it's really, really important to remember that. And I think that most people, I can't speak, but I think that a lot of people in their gut know that. That it is not just the chemical thing that is the medicine. It's the relationship you have to the medicine, and it's the power that is intangible that is in that medicine. And so the disrespect for that is not good. But that knowledge isn't valued. And I just want to say, a lot of you are, pretty progressive people, but the United States is not good on this at all. They call the axis of evil. Well, that's who I think is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples was passed in September of this year, 30 years after I was at the UN 30 years ago, trying to fight for the rights of Indigenous people, including the right to protect our intellectual and cultural property rights and our biological resources. The United Nations General Assembly just passed that after 30 years at the UN trying to get a recognition of the rights of Indigenous people to protect our medicines, our languages, our ceremonies, our land base, 30 years. 4 countries opposed it. Want to guess which 4? US, right? Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. You know? I mean, people would guess, I ask this out and they'd be like, oh, it must be England. But no, it is not. The United States is important to recognize. And so a lot of people are asking, like, a city like Missoula should pass a recognition of the rights of Indigenous people, pass the UN Declaration. Remember how the US didn't sign on Kyoto? But these cities are signing on? Do the same thing. Rights of Indigenous people. Should be recognized. The United States is not going to sign on. Well, cities should sign on and recognize it. So that's a long answer. I'm sorry. Thank you for your question, though.
My name's Sean, and I was just curious to know what inspires you.
Excuse me?
What inspires you?
What?
Inspires you.
Inspired. I'm sorry. I was like, what recital you were at? I was like, I think I've been at too many concerts or something. I come from a good family. My family was always, my grandma was in the Pocketbook Makers Union, in the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. She was, working class and fought for the rights of working class people. She was, an organizer in the union as well as a member. And my mother, was really active in is still in this world, but, real active in the civil rights movement and as an artist. My father was real active in the Native community. I was born in LA. My dad was in the Westerns. You guys don't want to know my whole history, but anyway, so he was born in, so my dad was in the Westerns, but he worked on trying to get an Indian center in LA, and just trying to get something, because there's a large urban population in LA of Indian people, and so we were trying to get those things there. And then I was raised during the Vietnam War, and my parents were anti-war protesters. And I remember getting hauled out of school for demonstrations, And I remember watching the body count every night on TV with Walter Cronkite. And so I never have been a supporter of wars. I'm not afraid to fight, but there better be a damn good reason, And so that all formed me. It totally formed me. The idea that you should not just stand and watch, that if you could do something, you should try to make a difference. And seeing how that raised my consciousness, and I give credit to all that, I remember an anti-war protest when I was about 8, it was the old age of my son there, and I was in Southern Oregon. I remember standing there at the courthouse, there was a vigil, and I remember that there was this one hippie guy standing next to me, and this guy cracked an egg on his head. And I just remember watching that egg drip down that guy's head, and that guy didn't move. But it left a huge impression on me. That you would stand there and you would say, what you're doing is wrong, drafting those young men. You know what I'm saying? And so I was raised, and then, the activism of Wounded Knee, American Indian Movement, people saying we're not going to be treated like second-class citizens anymore. A lot of people from my community were out there for that. And I just, I see that, and then I have the privilege of working with great people who fought for years, and seeing them, like the Skull Valley Goshoots, they fought a nuclear waste dump on their little reservation down there in Utah. Fought them for 10 years, and there's no nuclear waste dump going in down there, These people who just fight because they want some dignity, So it is hard to not feel inspired by them, and it's hard not to feel like I have immense privilege, as does everyone in this room. Compared to what a lot of people have to go through, we could do something, That's what I feel like, so, I don't know, thanks for your question. Good? Are we, got any more questions, you guys, or are we? I have some, okay, wait, 2 things, he's got one question. I have some literature that I really do not want to bring back to Minnesota. It's Honor the Earth. You can also get it on our website, and if you're interested in the work of White Earth and our work to protect wild rice, and you want to eat rice, Native Harvest or White Earth Land Recovery Project, but there's some literature in the back, and I know I'm signing some books, and I'll take this last question, and then I think Barbara's going to kick me off the stage here. Or where is it? Over there? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, hi. I'm from Arlee here. I'm a Salish and Navajo. My dad's Navajo. Actually, I'm Salish, Navajo, and Norwegian. My dad's from Navajo, and my family and my wife were from Navajo, the Four Corners area by Shiprock. And I was just curious about your perspective on the desert rock and the coal mining going on up here in Montana.
Thank you for your question, and I won't. So I was down there in that desert rock area, in Shiprock, and I was really, almost a reflection of what this young man asked me. I mean, I was a young woman, and I went to work down at Navajo, and I was horrified at these mining companies. You're talking the biggest energy corporations in the world, basically stealing the water and the lifeblood out of a land, and it's the same thing in Montana. I worked at research Northern Cheyenne in 1978. Same thing, And I went down there to work, and they say they got 5 coal-fired power plants down there, and they are spewing. Navajo and Crow are huge. Navajo, Crow, Ute, these are some big CO2 emitters. And those agreements, that whole plan was set up by the feds, and now you got a tribal economy that is largely dependent on revenues. Millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars of fossil fuel revenues. That's what colonialism looks like. That's what coal strip looks like. So they want to put in a new coal-fired power plant down there called Desert Rock. We've joined our organization as opposed that. It's far more efficient than the Four Corners power plant and the Page power plant and Mojave generating station and all those. It's more efficient, but you need more coal. And they call it clean, but you got to mine it. And then of course there'd be the water for that power plant. That is the question, isn't it, huh? Where's the water coming from for all these plants, The water for the Navajo power plant, 6,000 feet deep. How much energy does that take to pull out? By the time you're done sucking an aquifer dry that's 6,000 feet deep. What kind of plan is that, What's going to be left for those people? So we've been down there trying to, I got yelled at by Navajo tribe, I think on that one. We took out a full-page ad, and Navajo tribe called us outsiders. I was like, a lot of community people down there don't like that. So, it's the same thing up here. I was out at Northern Cheyenne, and you shouldn't have coal bed methane, and shouldn't, this coal. It's very tough. But the problem is that these Indian communities, the government for 30 years tries to get that coal, not the government, but the corporations for 30 years go knocking on the door over at Northern Cheyenne. Looks to me like that. And there's not, a plan B, in a lot of these communities. You need to have, 1,200 megawatts of wind, or whatever it is, if that's what you're going to be doing. You need to cut your level of consumption, though, as a country, because there's no way to feed this addiction. We could build wind turbines from now into oblivion to feed the level of addiction and the projected growth. Well, how about some efficiency? How about that? And then we could talk about renewables at the same time. But you cannot talk about trying to feed this level of consumption. It's like trying to figure out how to provide enough alternative fuels or, ethanol or corn-based ethanol to feed the gas tanks of American appetite. What you need is, you actually need a train system. I saw this discussion in the paper. I would have liked to hop a train. It was a nice drive, but geez. And I think it's James Howard Kunstler. He's great, The Long Emergency, but he has this quote, which is, The United States has a train system which would be an embarrassment to the country of Bulgaria. You know, which is true. And the trains are clogged with coal. I mean, that's all that's moving. I sit over there in northern Minnesota and I watch that. So the bigger answer to your question is like, you know, you need to have renewables, you need an alternative energy economy. Navajo Nation has more electrical engineers than any other Indian tribe in the country. You know, perfect adaptation in a transitional economy, a just transition strategy into a renewable energy strategy is, you know, I think we've got maybe one electrical engineer in Ojibwe country. You guys must have like 75 down there. Or you know what I'm saying is it's like to transition these economies into the next energy economy, you know, so that you have the jobs and the employment, you have a just energy economy in these communities that's based on these, you know, this wealth of resources, and then is based on a long-term strategy so that you still got enough water. I mean, you should not have to haul water in your Navajo families while power companies get to suck your aquifer dry. That is so unjust. You know, to me, that's the issues that are there. But, you know, so I am a firm believer that the next energy economy has got to be green, but I'm also a firm believer that the next energy economy has to have a cap on it, which is to say that you got to have efficiency. You know, and we have to force it into our economy because that is the only hope we have, you know, is a combination of that. And it is not so painful, you know. I have had a lot of privilege. I have traveled through Europe pretty extensively, and it doesn't look like it's killing them to have a train system. You know, they're looking pretty happy. I mean, I don't know what to say, but, you know, I just feel like, you know, rethinking what it is about. And then relocalizing our food economy so that we're not transporting it. You know, you could cut a good portion of your energy. They're saying up to 17% of the U.S. energy economy is used on food. Between slathering it on our food products and hauling it across the world. How did the banana get to be our favorite fruit? We don't even grow them. You know, we grow them on plantations down in Colombia with, you know, guys like Blackwater guarding them. Right? This guy's just got hauled into court for their human rights violations on their banana plantations at Chiquita. You know, I'm just saying you got to retool the economy for the bigger picture, you know, but in the meantime, thank you for your question. Listen, you guys, I know she's coming, and I know that, here she comes. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Please visit Impacted Nations, and thank you, Winona.